Hi there, my name is Brooke Moore, and I'm here to share with you a little bit about two frameworks for thinking. One of them is the decision maker moves, and it comes from the decision playbook. And the other one is a collaborative professional inquiry model called the spiral of inquiry. And what happens when we mix these two together? And it's quite beautiful, but I'm going to start with the decision maker moves, and I'm going to open with a story about my brother and a decision that he had to make recently. So my brother, when the pandemic hit in Canada, was living off the coast of Vancouver on a very small little island. And his girlfriend was living in LA. Well, when the borders started to close between Canada and the United States, she started phoning my brother more regularly, imploring him to fly to LA. Los Angeles at the time was a hotbed of coronavirus, so he was a little reluctant to jump on a plane and do that. I'm going to take you through his decision-making process to illustrate the decision-maker moves as they're described in the decision playbook. One of the things that was really important to him in making the decision as to whether or not he should fly to LA is the value of safety. He wouldn't have any health insurance were he to catch a coronavirus while he's in LA or anywhere in the States, and that could have costed hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so he was concerned about safety. Another value, though, something else that really mattered in making this decision is love. They're in love. And so what would he do for love, really, right? That's a core value here. And the last thing that he was really considering the impacts of this decision on was a project he was working on up in Canada. So let's look at now his options. The options as we saw them were he could stay in Canada, he could fly to LA, or he could fly to LA now, or he could fly to LA later. If he were to stay in Canada, when we're considering the consequences on safety of staying in Canada were quite positive. So we felt great about that. If he were to fly to LA at the time, they would have been pretty negative impacts on his safety. So we didn't feel good about that. If he's to fly to LA later, I mean, that's pretty unknown, as everything about the beginning of this pandemic felt very uncertain. So did the answer to that question, the consequences on safety. Now, if he's to stay in Canada, how would that impact love? Pretty badly. We knew that she was not going to be happy about that. And as time went on, he would really, really miss her and potentially regret his decision. If he were to fly to LA now, love would of course be impacted positively because it's a grand gesture of love, and who doesn't love those? If he's to fly to LA later, we're thinking it would have impacted the love value pretty poorly still, because there might have been some resentment, and that could have damaged the relationship over the long term. As for his project, staying in Canada means he could finish his project and see it through to a successful conclusion. Fly to LA now, no, he wouldn't be able to. It would be an indefinite pause. And fly to LA later, he could finish it. Now, if we were looking at this decision in terms of a pros and cons list, it's pretty clear that he should have stayed in Canada. But life is much more complex than a pros and cons list can allow, and so are most decisions. So he asked me, what should I do, Brooke? And I said, of course, valuing safety above all else, because he is my little brother, you should stay in Canada. It would be insane to fly into LA right now. On the last day that the air borders were open, in the afternoon of the last day, he was still debating this decision with his girlfriend. And so he asked my mother, and she looked him square in the eye and said, well, is she the one? He flew to LA. His girlfriend sent him a float plane to the little island where he was living. It picked him up off the dock, flew him to the airport, and then he got on the last flight out of Canada as the borders were closing. Now, this is a great example to describe to you the decision maker moves, because I just sort of illustrated them visually right there as I went through the story. But it also shows you a couple of the traps that we often fall into when we're making decisions. And we fall into these traps because of our neurology. We're wired to take shortcuts, anchor on the first things. One of the things my brother did was he asked me for my opinion. He knew very well what I was going to say. So in doing that, he was had confirmation bias, which was a trap that he fell into, because I confirmed his bias and he knew I would. When he asked my mom, he was actually expecting her to say the same thing too, but she has a way of surprising us. Shane Saphir talks about the shortcuts that our brains take as single stories. And that's one of these, the traps that we get attached to stories that we tell. And they frame, so much of how we see the world, our assumptions, our untested, our unacknowledged assumptions. And in education, this is a really important one to call out and to reflect on, because the decisions we make about kids can set trajectories. And if we make those decisions based on a single story or one dimension or one perspective that we may have or somebody has about a child, then that seems rather unfair. Here are the decision maker moves. And they're just as I illustrated them to you. I'll move out of the way in the story. And here is the spiral of inquiry. Now, this is a beautiful model because it follows an emergent path and allows you to respond to the landscape in front of you, to the student's needs. And it also demands some deep learning. The nice thing about using these two models together is that it shows you, as we move through the spiral, what we're valuing as we move through the spiral, and that our decisions reveal what we value. Now, often we say in education that we value equity. Well, if this is true, creating equity means slowing down to system 2 thinking and collaborating with those who may bring different perspectives. And that's why collaborative professional inquiry is so powerful, because we get to see something from all different perspectives and really think carefully about them. Collaborative inquiry, Timperley and her colleagues say, is very much about navigating solutions. And here we have a pathway of decisions that leads you through a collaborative inquiry. So that's why we need to have these two models woven together so that we're not acting our way through the spiral of inquiry, but we're actively thinking our way through the spiral of inquiry. This is a paper that I wrote in collaboration with Judy Halbert and Linda Kaiser and Brooke Douglas and some learners at the University of British Columbia's Transformational Educational Leadership Program. I would invite you to check it out. I'll put the link at the end of this video, and just sort of peruse the variety of decisions that you may encounter when working through the spiral of inquiry, or any model of collaborative professional inquiry for that matter. If we think about it as a path of decisions, as a process of making decisions about kids' futures, then that's something worth doing thoughtfully and deeply. Thank you.